All right, welcome to your deep dive. This time, we're looking at something pretty different. We've got excerpts from episode 169, Retrocausality and Decolonizing the Mind.pdf.
Intriguing title.
Right, and it gets even more interesting. You might be thinking, decolonization. What's that got to do with how I think? But that's the whole point, see?
Okay, I'm listening.
We're not just talking empires and borders here. This deep dive is about how decolonization, actually starts inside our minds.
Interesting. So how does this article approach that idea?
Well, the author, Jaime Hoerricks, links decolonization to, how we process information. And they talk about these gestalt language processors, GLPs, who experience the world in a unique way.
GLPs, huh? Sounds like something out of a sci-fi novel.
Right, I know. I was hooked by the name, too.
Yeah.
But what exactly makes these GLPs so special?
So the article explains that GLPs don't experience things linearly, like bit by bit, the way many people do. It's more like they see the whole picture first, like a finished puzzle, not individual pieces.
Ah, I see. So instead of seeing the trees, they see the whole forest first. They're looking for the overall pattern, the connections.
Exactly. And it's not just passive observation. GLPs are constantly evaluating, restructuring, taking in new info, and integrating it into how they understand the world.
Yeah.
The author even uses their own love for sci-fi as an example, talking about how all those stories about power and technology they later realized were full of colonial ideas.
That's a great point. Even stuff we encounter early on, seemingly harmless stuff, can totally shape how we see things later on. Like, I was obsessed with those adventure books growing up, the ones with explorers discovering new lands. Looking back, those stories completely ignored the people already living there.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. Those early inputs, they create a framework, like a lens for understanding complex topics. So thinking about your experiences, what were some early influences that really shaped your worldview? What books, movies, maybe even conversations come to mind?
Wow, that's something I'm definitely going to have to ponder. It's like mental archaeology, digging through those layers. But getting back to the author, how did they deal with realizing even their beloved sci-fi was full of these colonial ideas?
They realized that just recognizing the harmful stuff wasn't enough. They felt this urge to actively decolonize their own mind. Like changing the information they were taking in, they called it cognitive restructuring.
Cognitive restructuring? That sounds intense. Is it like a mental Marie Kondo session? Tossing out beliefs that don't spark joy?
Yeah, it's a bit more nuanced than that. Imagine your mind has this framework, like scaffolding, for understanding the world. Cognitive restructuring is like examining that framework, finding parts based on outdated or harmful ideas, and then actively rebuilding it with new understanding.
Okay, I see the difference. It's not just rejecting information, but changing how we process it. But that sounds like a lot of work. The article even mentions this energy cost of being constantly vigilant about what you take in, especially in a world full of NLP, gaslighting, all that stuff designed to manipulate us.
Yeah, the author definitely acknowledges that. Keeping up that constant awareness can be draining. But they also emphasize how freeing it feels to reclaim your mind, to take control of how you make sense of the world.
Right, so it's not about becoming super cynical and distrusting everything. It's more about building those critical thinking skills, identifying those manipulative tactics, and then choosing how you want to engage with them.
Exactly. And that leads us to another fascinating concept the author discusses, retrocausality.
Okay, I'll be honest, that one's a bit over my head. Could you break it down for me?
Sure. In simple terms, retrocausality is the idea that our current understanding doesn't just add to our past knowledge, it actually changes how we interpret it.
Oh, interesting. So it's not about erasing the past, but seeing it through a new, more informed lens.
You got it. They talk about revisiting those sci-fi stories from their childhood. They didn't try to pretend they never enjoyed them, but they could now see them differently, recognizing those colonial narratives woven in.
That makes sense, like how we can look back on events in our own lives and see them completely differently as we gain more experience.
Exactly. So think about this. How might your understanding of past experiences be reshaped by what we're discussing now? What comes to mind?
Wow, that's a powerful question. I'm already thinking of a few instances where my perspective has totally shifted over time.
It's about being open to that evolution of understanding. And speaking of shifting perspectives, the author takes on some pretty big institutions when it comes to controlling the narratives we consume, specifically the Pentagon, Hollywood, and corporate publishing.
Whoa, okay. Are we about to dive into a conspiracy theory here?
Not quite. But the author does make a compelling argument about how these institutions shape our understanding of things like war, capitalism, even what we consider normal.
Hmm.
They talk about this concept of manufactured consent.
Okay, manufactured consent. That sounds a little ominous. What exactly does it mean?
It's the idea that powerful groups can shape public opinion, even behavior, just by controlling the information people are exposed to. For example, the author points out how the Pentagon often works with Hollywood to create films that portray the U.S. military in a specific way.
So it's not just about overt propaganda, it's more subtle. It's about shaping the narratives we absorb through entertainment, even education.
Exactly. And it's not just about war either. Think about corporate publishing and how it can influence the types of books that are widely available. The author argues that this can reinforce the idea of capitalist realism, making it seem like there's no alternative to the current economic system.
Wow, this is getting deep. It's like those layers of the matrix peeling back. Makes you wonder, what narratives have I unknowingly absorbed throughout my life?
And that's the kind of critical thinking the author is encouraging. It's about recognizing how these powerful forces might be shaping your worldview without you even realizing it.
Okay, so if we're constantly bombarded with these carefully crafted narratives, how do we break free? How do we take control of our own information intake?
The author really stresses actively seeking out diverse perspectives, challenging those dominant narratives. They talk about intentionally curating their inputs, looking for authors and creators who offer alternative ways of seeing the world.
So it's about being proactive, creating a more balanced information diet, right? Not just consuming whatever's thrown at us, but actively searching for different viewpoints.
Precisely. And this is where the author brings those GLPs back into the conversation. They argue that GLPs, with their ability to see patterns and connections, have a crucial role in helping others understand this whole process of decolonizing their minds.
So the GLPs are like the key to unlocking this whole thing. Like they're the ones who can see the matrix code.
Heh, it's not quite about having a key or seeing code, but their unique way of processing information can offer some really valuable insights. The author calls for GLPs to be more visible, to share their understanding with the world.
It's like they have this superpower that can help us see the world in a new light.
That's an interesting way to put it. It's not necessarily about superpowers, but more about embracing different ways of thinking and learning from each other.
This has been an incredible start to our deep dive. It feels like we've already covered so much ground.
We've only just scratched the surface. But this gives us a great foundation for understanding the author's perspective on decolonizing the mind.
So where do we go from here? What other fascinating insights are waiting for us in this deep dive?
In the next part, we'll delve deeper into the author's personal journey of decolonization. We'll explore the specific steps they took to actively restructure their thinking and how those strategies could apply to your life.
I can't wait to hear more. I'm already starting to rethink some of my own assumptions and beliefs. Stay tuned, listeners. Things are about to get even more interesting. And we're back for part 2 of our deep dive into decolonizing the mind. We've been unpacking some pretty heavy concepts, like how those early things we're exposed to shape our thinking, and how powerful groups might be influencing the narratives we consume.
Yeah, it's about recognizing those unseen forces that can shape our worldview without us even realizing it.
Right. And last time, we left off with the author's idea of cognitive restructuring as a way to, actively challenge those narratives that we've kind of internalized. It sounds like a process that takes some serious effort.
Yeah, the author's pretty upfront about that. They describe it as this continuous process of questioning and unlearning and rebuilding.
So it's not like a one-time mental makeover. It's an ongoing commitment to examining your beliefs and being open to new perspectives.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the author's personal experience with sci-fi. Remember how they realized their favorite genre was actually full of colonial ideas?
Right. It's a real light bulb moment for them.
Well, instead of just ditching sci-fi altogether, they took a more, thoughtful approach. They started seeking out authors and creators who offered different perspectives within the genre.
So it's about diversifying your inputs, even within the things you already enjoy.
Yeah. It's about broadening your horizons and challenging yourself to see things from different angles. The author specifically mentions seeking out works that embraced complexity, prioritized coexistence, and offered different models of power and progress.
It's so interesting. It's like they were curating a more balanced, nuanced experience within their favorite genre.
And it wasn't just about finding new stuff. They also talk about engaging with that content critically. They describe their process of constantly evaluating and restructuring integrating new information into their existing framework.
That reminds me of what we were talking about before, retrocausality, the idea that new knowledge can actually change how we understand past experiences.
That's a huge part of their process. They weren't trying to pretend they never liked sci-fi, but they could now see those stories through a new lens, recognizing how those narratives had subtly shaped their thinking.
I can see how that would be powerful for personal growth. It's not about feeling guilty about what you used to enjoy, but about recognizing how your perspective has changed over time.
Exactly. It's about embracing that evolution and using it to inform your present understanding. And the author argues that this critical engagement is especially important when it comes to the information we get from powerful institutions.
Right, we were talking about how institutions like the Pentagon, Hollywood, and corporate publishing have a hand in shaping public opinion.
The author goes even deeper into that here. They talk about how these institutions act as gatekeepers, controlling which narratives are spread widely.
So they're kind of like the curators of the mainstream narrative.
In a way, yeah. They've got a vested interest in keeping things as they are, so they often promote stories that reinforce their power and authority.
Can you give some examples? I'm having trouble picturing how this plays out in the real world.
Sure. Think about the Pentagon's involvement in Hollywood movies. They often provide funding and equipment, even access to military resources, to movies that portray the U.S. military in a heroic light.
So it's not just blatant propaganda. It's about subtly shaping how we view things like war and military intervention.
Exactly. It's about normalizing those narratives and making them seem like common sense.
What about corporate publishing? How do they influence what information we encounter?
The author argues that corporate publishing often prioritizes books that support the current economic system, even if that system is causing harm. They use the term capitalist realism to describe this.
It's like those books create this illusion that there's no other option besides capitalism, even if it's clearly not working for everyone.
Exactly. And that's why the author advocates for seeking out alternative voices, authors and creators who are challenging those dominant narratives. They see this as a crucial part of decolonizing your mind.
It's about breaking free from those mental constraints that have been placed on us and opening ourselves up to new possibilities. But that sounds like a huge task. Where do you even begin to find those alternative voices?
The author suggests starting by being more deliberate about the information you take in. Think critically about your sources and ask yourself if they're giving you a balanced perspective.
So be a more conscious consumer of information, not just taking in whatever's presented, but actively seeking out different viewpoints.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be overwhelming. Start small. Maybe pick one new book each month from an author you've never read, or subscribe to a podcast that challenges your current beliefs.
It's about making small changes in your information diet and seeing what clicks with you.
And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. You don't need to have all the answers right away. The author emphasizes that decolonizing your mind is an ongoing process.
It's about constantly learning and evolving.
And being okay with the discomfort that comes with challenging your own assumptions.
That's so important. It might not always be easy or comfortable, but ultimately it's about growth and liberation.
And this is where the author brings us back to those GLPs and their unique role in this whole thing.
Okay, remind me again why GLPs are so important in this whole decolonization process.
Well, remember, GLPs tend to see the world more holistically. They're naturally drawn to patterns and connections, the big picture.
Right, like they have a built-in radar for those subtle narratives and underlying structures that shape how we think.
The author believes GLPs have a special ability to help others see those things too. They call for GLPs to be more visible, to share their perspectives and insights. They even say, making the invisible work of decolonizing our minds visible to others.
That's powerful. It's like they're saying, don't underestimate the impact of your unique perspective.
And I think that applies to everyone. Whether or not you identify as a GLP, we all have something unique to bring to the table.
So what does this all mean for our listener, for you? How can you take these ideas and make them work in your own life?
Well, I think the first step is to cultivate that mindset of curiosity and critical thinking. Be aware of the information you're taking in and ask yourself if it's giving you a balanced view.
Don't just passively absorb whatever's thrown your way. Be an active participant in shaping your own worldview.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone. Look for diverse voices and perspectives, even if they challenge what you currently believe.
It's about expanding your horizons and embracing the complexity of the world.
And remember, decolonizing your mind isn't about reaching some perfect state of awareness. It's an ongoing journey of learning, unlearning, and relearning.
It's about being open to new information and constantly evolving how you understand things.
And you don't have to do it alone. Connect with others who are on a similar path. Share your insights, learn from their experiences, and support each other.
This deep dive has been truly eye-opening. We've dug deep into some tough concepts, but I feel like I've come out of it with a renewed sense of purpose and possibility.
It's amazing how exploring these ideas can cause such a big shift in perspective.
So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, we want to leave you with this thought from the author. How can you make the invisible work of decolonizing your mind visible to others?
How can you share your journey and inspire others to start their own?
Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep growing. The world needs your unique voice and perspective. We'll be back soon with the final part of our deep dive into decolonizing the mind.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into decolonizing the mind. Feels like we've been on quite a journey, exploring how our thinking gets shaped and those forces that influence how we see the world.
Yeah, we've covered a lot, from those early influences to powerful institutions and even those gestalt language processors, but now it's time to get practical.
Exactly. I'm ready for some actionable takeaways.
Yeah.
The author talks about actually restructuring their thinking, so I'm curious to hear the specific steps they took.
Well, they emphasize right off the bat that decolonizing your mind isn't a one-time fix. It's an ongoing thing. It's all about cultivating that mindset of always questioning, always being open to new ways of looking at things.
So it's more about the journey than reaching some final destination.
Exactly. And a big step they took was becoming super intentional about what information they let in. They call it curating their inputs. We've touched on being mindful of what we consume, but how did they actually go about curating those inputs?
They started by actively searching for diverse voices and perspectives, especially those that challenged the mainstream narratives they were used to. They specifically talk about seeking out authors and creators who operate outside of that mainstream.
So it's about going beyond your usual sources of information and actively looking for alternative perspectives.
Right. They talk about being drawn to works that embrace complexity, that prioritize coexistence, and offer different models of power and progress.
It's like building a richer, more nuanced ecosystem of information around yourself.
I like that. And it's not just about passively consuming content either. They also talk about engaging with it critically, constantly evaluating, integrating that new information into their existing framework.
That reminds me of retrocausality, how new knowledge can totally change how we understand our past experiences. It's like actively weaving those new insights into how we understand things.
You got it. And for them, this active engagement was key in deconstructing those colonial narratives they'd internalized. They could look back at their past and see it with fresh eyes, a more critical lens.
It's like taking back your own story and rewriting it with a new perspective.
Yeah, and they encourage others to do the same, especially those gestalt language processors.
Right, because GLPs tend to see the world in a more holistic way, noticing patterns and connections that others might miss.
They see this as a huge advantage in the whole decolonizing process. They want GLPs to be more visible, to share their perspectives and insights with the world. They even say, making the invisible work of decolonizing our minds visible to others.
Powerful statement. It's like saying, hey, don't underestimate the impact of your unique perspective.
And I think that applies to everyone, whether you see yourself as a GLP or not. We all have something unique to offer.
So what does all this mean for our listener, for you? How can you take these ideas and actually use them in your own life?
I think the first step is to cultivate that mindset of curiosity and critical thinking. Be aware of what you're taking in, information-wise, and ask yourself, is this giving me a balanced view?
Don't just passively accept whatever's put in front of you. Be an active part of shaping your own worldview.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone. Look for diverse voices, diverse perspectives, even if they challenge what you currently believe.
It's about broadening your horizons, embracing how complex the world really is.
And remember, decolonizing your mind isn't about achieving some perfect state of awareness. It's an ongoing journey of learning and unlearning and relearning.
It's about being open to new information, constantly evolving how you understand things.
And you don't have to do it alone. Connect with others on a similar path. Share what you've learned, learn from their experiences, and support each other along the way.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. We went deep into some complex ideas, but I feel like I've come out of it with a new sense of purpose and possibility.
It's amazing how powerful a shift in perspective exploring these ideas can create.
As we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with this final thought from the author. How can you make the invisible work of decolonizing your mind visible to others? How can you share your journey and inspire others to embark on their own? Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep growing. The world needs your unique voice and perspective. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.